this year it's at Rio, tomorrow it's at Paris, tomorrow it's at Switzerland, all these things, that it makes it possible for all these countries to benefit from visibility, and how every country gets to benefit from all the benefits and all these sort of things. And so vulnerable countries now have the opportunity to impact the economic benefits that come with having it wandering from city to city. We think, panel, that the reason why today's debate is not about those vulnerable countries or smaller countries who need this publicity is because of the requirements that come with hosting the Olympics, either the Summer Olympics or the Winter Olympics. Number one, it's extremely like they expect so much from you. So certain standards or facilities they expect you to do. Secondly, they expect you to do it and deliver it within a specific amount of time. Thirdly, they are like I said, standards and all these sort of things in the first place. It makes it extremely expensive to do all these things in that particular regard. Most of the time, these countries, these smaller countries, they might end up trying to bid, but it always goes back to the big guys like Brazil, like Rio, like France, the countries that already have so much visibility and so much like clout and appeal in that particular regard. That cannot be the impact. Like, we don't think that is the most important like stakeholder. Then that means that today's debate can also not be about corruption, to say that, oh, most of the time these big guys always pay their way through, so because of that we should make it in one system. If one side can prove that there's corruption, the other side can also prove that there'll be corruption in selecting the permanent city. We don't think that is the most important analysis. But then let's show you why we think that is incredibly important. Number one, why do we think status quo is bad? We think status quo is extremely bad because of a principle on return of investment. Notice that countries are kept under strict regulations as to what the standard or the quality of the particular facility that they need to provide actually are. But like I've already told you, they expect it to be delivered within a particular point of time. It means you do not have the elasticity that comes with having a long amount of time, say 10 years, say 50 years, to do these sort of things in the first place. That makes it extremely expensive and have a lot of like strain on taxpayers' pockets. Considering today's today's world in status quo, where like there is a lot of like economic hardships in places all around the world, so much so that even the bigger countries like the United States of America and the United Kingdom and all these countries are facing a massive like downturn in the financial capabilities of taxpayers, but also the government in itself. We think that expecting these things of these people means that they can never fully like give us the facilities up to the quality that we determine or the demand, especially as things are getting more expensive. Inflation has hit an all-time high, and these sort of things are expensive and very difficult to do. Panel, what then is our model? We think that our model like has to do with the International Olympic Committee, right? This is how it's going to, or is it Olympic Council, IOC generally, right? This is what we think. Number one, that there's going to be a little bit of like requirement of these countries. Number one, it has to be a country which has a deeply rooted sports culture, and I'll show you why that is extremely important. But number two, it should be a country that has conducive environment within a particular period of time which is expected of it. So for instance, the country should not have extreme temperature during the times of the winter. It should not have extreme temperature during the times of summer. Secondly, we don't think it should be a country or a particular city that necessarily has a case of like massive cases of theft, of robbery, and all these sort of things. This makes it incredibly unconducive for these individuals in a particular regard. On the second level of our model, we think that this is how it's going to look like, right? The IOC comes to a vote to determine what country this will most likely be. So provided the country fulfills all the above specifications, they get to determine that sort of thing. So like I said, it can't be about corruption, because if it's about corruption, it will affect this side as well. So corruption is symmetric. But thirdly, we think countries would have to come together, right? Once they determine the country, so let's say this year is going to Switzerland, countries will now have to come together to make sure that like the IOC will have to make sure that they provide these facilities that are of the quality that they think are most likely what they necessarily demand. It means then that the burden that exists on countries in status quo to provide these facilities, of which I've proved to you that it's extremely difficult for them to provide, will most likely be borne by the IOC. It means that members of the IOC will most likely contribute to do these sort of things in that particular regard. It means that the funds will be generated by the IOC to set up these structures in this particular regard. What then does this mean? It democratizes like the process. It means that no country like suffers so much from that particular thing. But secondly, it means then that now that it belongs to the IOC, every member of the IOC who contributed to the construction of that particular building or that particular facility has the ability to benefit from the sale of paraphernalia, from the sale of tickets and all these sort of things, because we have a claim over that particular, how do you call it, facility. It's not owned by one country. It means that they don't bear all the costs. But secondly, the resources that are generated are democratized and are shared alongside, and everyone gets access to that sort of thing in a particular regard. Why do we think that is incredibly important? Because like we say, in a country where that sort of thing is very, like there's a massive sports culture, it means then that you ensure that you always get your return on investment. Tickets will always be sold because people have a deep-rooted interest in that particular sport. It means then that you never run at a loss. Because in status quo, what these countries do is that they think that they get some level of benefit as a result. But then 10 years on, Rio can give you this example. 10 years on, they still haven't gotten the return on the investment that they most likely put in that particular regard. We think you don't ensure that particular benefit. We are better able to ensure it. But secondly, we think it's a better world even for the losing countries who come to participate within that particular sport. But before I move on, I'll take that POI. Right, that's wonderful. Right, we think it's better even for countries who lose within that particular space. What are the countries who most likely lose? These look like developing countries, countries who are now growing, countries who are now getting to bring their sportsmen on that particular stage. Notice that most of the time, they pour their hearts and their souls into participating for this contest. But secondly, the government pours millions of taxpayers' dollars into developing this particular facility, developing these particular athletes in this particular regard. This is what happens. They go in there and they most likely lose. Literally, you realize that the number of medals that come, you have just 1% going to the developing world. It means that they never actually end up getting some sort of benefit from that particular thing. In our world, even when they lose, because of the fact that they are a member of the IOC and that they contributed to the construction of that facility, they always leave the place with some portion of that particular benefit that comes. So if it's an amount of money that is generated from the sale of tickets, from the sale of jerseys, from the sale of individuals participating or streaming pay-per-view, they have that particular income that comes to them as a result. We think that status quo, one, expects so much of these countries, but two, that it's getting extremely difficult to do these sort of things in the first place. That three, most of these countries are extremely incompatible with the sports culture. And four, that these countries most likely don't achieve their return on investment. In the one way you spread it across, the cost becomes minimal for most countries or for all countries, but also they make sure that day in, day out, they also make sure that they get that sort of benefit, as well as getting like the standard of like facilities and all these things. Incredibly proud to propose.
Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, as of now, when it comes to issues regarding the Olympics, the IOC is the highest power. It means the IOC has the power to tell countries to have certain standards when they give them the bid. It means then, in a world whereby you concentrate the power of a state to be the one who is dictating what is happening within the Olympics, you remove that deciding power from the IOC. It means that if you buy into Matthew's case about how the IOC is going to put a lot of funds in there, they are going to build structures within these countries. It means, one, these countries knowing that these structures will forever stay within that country, the likelihood for them to get away with a lot of things that they want to get away with is very, very high. But that's just in response to the last thing that Matthew said. Our case on side open opposition is in four folds. First, we are for the proliferation of sports globally, regardless of the country. Second, the bidding process and the quality that it enforces with the millions of countries that exist. Thirdly, the economic boost that exists not just individually and state-wise, but within the region that the country that wins the bid exists. Fifthly, the cultural interaction and how the fact that the bid has been very synchronized or shared across has been very integral to the fact that toleration and globalization has gotten to the point where it has gotten to be. Firstly, on the proliferation of sports. Panel, preemptively, these guys can say it takes a lot of money to host the Olympics, hence the taxpayers are suffering. We reject the premise that the fact that these countries host a certain Olympics means there is no revenue that they get from it. Note, a lot of these facilities that are gotten or built up in these countries are in one way or the other converted to other facilities. So case in point, point, when the London hosted the Olympics, right now the stadiums have been leased out to West Ham. It means that the country is getting profit from leasing it out to West Ham. But another thing, most countries convert it to training facilities. So swimming centers, football centers, whereby the newer generation can use these facilities to grow their strength. We think this is a net benefit not just to these individuals, but a state as a whole. Because the Olympics will come again and you require to bring participants in of itself. We think this is a benefit that you cannot shake when it's centered around one country in of itself. But another thing to note, the cultural interaction. So note panel, the reason why a lot of people became more tolerant to Qatar or more tolerant to the different ideologies that we have is because of the World Cup. So you realize they interacted with the nature and the culture of these various countries. They became more tolerant and they became more accepting of different ideologies. We think this is the next benefit that you cannot get when it is centered within one country. At best, they can say, oh, people from different countries will come within and they can talk to each other. But we do not agree that it's the same thing, because note, the cultural representation that's existing within a particular country is different from when a singular person goes outside and tries to represent that particular culture. But another thing to note on panel is how the breeding process enforces quality. So note, the reason why China and the Uyghur Muslims, they became more lax to the extent whereby the Olympics allowed them to bid was because they wanted to bid it. They wanted to win the bid. Because tourists will come into your country. They come with currency, they come with hard cash, and this contributes when they rent out hotels, when they buy certain things. This is an economic benefit that every single country knows. It means they are incentivized to shift on certain ideologies that the globe thinks is too hard-stream. So case in point, Uyghur Muslims in China. Case in point, Qatar, and being too strict with the hijab, too strict with alcohol. All these things are things that they become more lax on because they know the economic benefits that they will get from winning a bid. We think the bidding process existence is the reason why this hard line or these extremist countries have told the line of centrism in of itself. In a world whereby you center it in one particular country, that is something that erodes all the benefits we have gotten from the bidding process. But that's just on ideologies and social standards. Now moving on to quality. Most governments would want to win this bid because they know it has economic benefits. It coerces the government to rightfully utilize this money, monetary capacities, in a way that would benefit the state. Because yes, they will equally get money from it. It means in a world whereby they build stadiums, they build certain facilities that would be used to host the Olympics in of itself, one way or the other, it benefits the citizenry. Because you, the owner of that hotel, is the one who's going to get the money at the end of the day. We think all this in of itself is tied to the existence of the bidding process. You erode all these benefits when you give it to only one country. But another thing you need to interrogate is on which country is going to get it at the end of the day. Because note, panel, at first they argue that, oh, it's something that we're going to do through the IOC, etc. We think the fact that it's going to be centered on one country brings a lot of questions. But not another thing, panel. They did not show the necessity of it. What problem is on grounds that requires a need for us to stagnate the bidding process? What is the push, what's the tipping point that requires you to stagnate a bidding process and put it within one country? That was not answered right before that. Case in point of the London thing. So when they built the stadium, I agree. The number that you wanted that will come for the Olympics is maybe millions, but this is it. The citizens within the country equally are maybe millions. The rural young boy who is learning to play football, etc. So they metamorphosize those facilities, and usually maybe it's one big stadium. So they have a section for swimming, they have a section for javelin throwing, etc. We do not think that any government will stay by and let these facilities go waste. And you have seen it happen in case of London, etc. We do not think it's something that's so problematic. But another thing to note again, panel, is on the economic boost and how it aids the country and the region around it. Panel, we think that most of the income that are gotten within countries like Maldives, countries like Switzerland, etc., are the tourism factor of it. When people come within your country, they like the way you are. It becomes a vacation spot. It means that in a world whereby your PR is shaped in a way that your country is seen as bougie and attractive, due to the fact that someone came to your country to play the Olympics and it was attractive to them, we think this also creates a chain whereby not only the citizens within the country, but that region of itself is subservient to exploration. We think the economic boost that comes to tourism is something that not only these countries, but countries within the region are privy to enjoy. We think all these are benefits. The harms at best are mitigatory. Because note, even if you say, oh, these facilities are lost, you'll not be able to use them, there's always a chance whereby they're metamorphosized to something else. The benefits are high, and there's a less likelihood that they will be gotten elsewhere. Note, panel, in order for all these impacts that are told you, the proliferation of sports, the breeding process, the quality enforces, the economic boost it inculcates, and the cultural interaction that exists. All these things are due to the fact that Olympics has been taken from country to country. The burden on side off is to prove that we can acquire all these things when it is present in only one singular country and nowhere else. Proud to oppose.
3, 2, 1. Two flippant responses to our keys. First, that on our side of the house, countries get away with bad things. But this ignores Matthew's framing because Matthew proves to you that most of the time these countries that will most likely do it are most likely countries that have the social capital anyway. So for example, the best countries that behave the best. So for example, the US, for example, other big countries that actually do well, it means the extent to which they can say that you can hold these countries into account is very small. Why? Because on our side of the house, most of these countries that will be doing it anyways are the countries that are mostly well behaved. So for example, the US, if you bid and the US gets the bid, it means most of the time it's the US that is doing that. The US is most likely well behaved. This then means that they cannot say on our side of the house, countries get away with bad things. Like, do you get what I'm saying? The second thing is on necessity and why, and they say that we don't prove necessity on our side of the house. Matthew proves to you why this is extremely necessary. You get to save costs. Secondly, the IOC and member states get to benefit from all these kinds of returns. But before that, yes, P1. But we prove to you how this is going to be like. Most likely things like consideration. So which countries can best host it in that regard? But that's even worse on your side because if you bid it to certain countries that cannot shoulder the cost, then it becomes horrible because every country would also want to bid in that regard. It means that the consideration of which country can best hold it and shoulder the cost is lost on their side of the house. On our side, what we prove to you is that most of the countries that would be able to host these things are most likely countries who can shoulder the cost in that regard. I don't think that PY is a useful PY. Quality from open opposition, and they say like the bidding process, and you can hold them into account. First, what we put to you is Matthew's first response. One, that these people just do it for just a period of time. So for example, the Olympics happens every year, and that country bids. It does not mean that these countries stop doing whatever they are doing. What this means is that the extent of accountability in the OO case is so small because these countries will go and do it again. But secondly, and this is the flip for their side, most of these countries use this as an opportunity to engage in things like sports washing. So for example, in 1938, when Berlin hosted the Olympics, the conversations are like Germany has hosted one of the best Olympics in the entire history. Thirdly, and that's why a lot of countries engage in these kinds of things because they want to wash away their image. The extent to which you give these countries the capacity to be able to wash away their image, that is when accountability is even better on our side because on their side of the house, they don't get the opportunity to even wash away their reputation of all the horrible things that they have done in that regard. Thirdly, next thing on economic impact and how you can get money, yada yada yada. First, realize that they don't prove the extent to which the Olympics can give you this. And why am I saying that? Because Matthew engages that preemptively. Why? Because if people are going to shoulder the cost of these to pay taxes, people within the country now taxes will become increased because the countries want to shoulder the cost of all these things. Keep this in mind. Most of these countries already have the social capital. So, for example, Brazil would always get more people to come to its countries because of the tourist sites that it already has. The Olympics does not create that unique thing that they want. This means the extent to which these people can get more tourism in the OOKs is so limited. It means that even on our side of the house, even if they don't host it, they will still get people to even flock there in their numbers anyways, and that's the reason why people still engage in tourism. Next is on the cultural implication, yada yada. We don't think this is an important thing you should buy in your deliberation because people don't really care about mixing with other people. What most of them care about are economic impacts because these economic impacts are much more proximate to them. They feel these things, and so this is a much more weighty clash that you have to prioritize as opposed to cultural implications which can still be gotten on any side of the house. People can like just mingle with their friends. Things like social media exist. I don't think that's as important as Umu tries to make it out to be. Two things in this speech. First, why you exacerbate spending. Two things. First, realize that a lot of countries have nationalistic tendencies. It means most of them want to prove that they are the best. Most of them want to prove to other countries that they are the ones who can hold the best things. They are the ones who have the best, who have the most ego. Secondly, a lot of them, as I proved to you, engage in things like sports washing to wash away the perception that people have of them in the public. What does this mean? It means even if the IOC gives these guys money to be able to shoulder the cost, these people exacerbate the spending so that they can host the best thing that has ever happened in your life. It means that even if the IOC has the capacity to give these people the money like they talked to you about, the response cannot be, but then they have funding. No, the case is these people exacerbate the spending and therefore give all these kinds of economic repercussions on the people who exist within the country anyways. Next thing, why then is this even much more impactful? Matthew proves to you which people are affected in this regard. People who don't care, most people who do not care about the Olympics. So even if you hosted the Olympics, people want things like money. People want things like being able to pay their taxes, etc. Second thing on allowance for internal politics. Realize that the way you can bid is very cutthroat and competitive. What this means is that if there's a country who was not able to win the bid, things around politics start permeating the space. So people start blaming other countries for not being able to host it. The idea here is not that they will be corrupt, but the idea here is the signaling behind that. Things like anti-Western sentiments, when people believe that the West is always going to hoard all these kinds of things in that regard, this allows people for opportunity to speculate that the reason why they don't get this bid is because some other country was able to be corrupt. What this impacts in this round is that it affects people's response to the Olympics. People who care about going to represent their country always feel like their countries are always left out because they feel like their countries are weak, and that's why they couldn't get the bid in that regard. On our side, people are much more able to accept this fact because they know that this country is always going to host it. At a point where you give people the bias that they can't be able to host it and you disappoint them, that is when all these things happen and all the engagement that people have with the Olympics becomes reduced by and by. And that's the context of the debate, the reduced buying of the Olympics, and secondly, the cost that Matthew gives to you, crowd.
Okay, so starting in 3, 2, 1. So Hitler would have wanted his 30 seconds on TV during the 1938 Olympics or his opportunity to grandstand, but we don't care about that. What we care about is that there was a black man called Jesse Owens who hit the racists right on the grounds, and it evoked a very loud message that blacks stand. The people who get to benefit from this narrative are the people we care about. The oppression in these countries can still happen regardless. But the fact that despite of those dictatorial tendencies in those countries, minorities are allowed the opportunity to dominate within those settings is a powerful message and a benefit in and of itself in that regard. In any case, they don't show in their world how the country that will get it is probably not the richest countries in terms of sports currency, i.e. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Co, who are actively fighting for some of these things, and they will not use it for political greenwashing or whatever, sports washing in that regard. But I think there's a fundamental problem, and I've realized this. When side government does not have a case, the first speaker comes to full. Then we bring a proper case, then they now get a chance to engage. They have to show why, and they have not met that burden in the policy motion. Their problem, how they solve it in that regard. Their rebuttals to us does not make them win. At best, it levels the playing field in that regard. Do better when you're on GAB. That strategy is old. So, 6 things then I get from them, or 7. The first one is that the current arrangement expects so much of countries. You are not forced to bid for it. You are not forced to host it. Logically, the reason why states bid for it is because they perceive a certain benefit that they gain from it. The second case then they say is that it's usually not compatible with sports culture. True, with the sports culture of the country hosting it. True. The more reason why these countries sometimes bid to host these games, to develop the internal sports culture, and my partner sometimes benefits the region as a whole. So they're doing a South African World Cup. Zimbabwe and the Zambia and all the countries around benefited from it. Exposure to some of the best footballing talent and best football infrastructure and what have you in that regard. There's a famous movie about some children who trekked all the way from one to South Africa and a very nice one. So that's how countries actually develop that sports culture that you say is non-existent. The third claim then they make is that these countries don't achieve their return on investment. First, that calculation is an assumption that countries do this only in monetary terms. What about the political capital that they're able to gain by hosting these games? What about the citizen appeasement, sometimes at tough times or crisis? For example, the reason why Paris is hosting it in that regard is because of the U.S. protests that has headed them for years in that regard. Protests that has headed them for years. Sometimes these are ways of appeasing citizenry, achieving peace and security within those countries in that regard. Also, the grandstanding that you say is sometimes a benefit because, for example, in 2002, the reason why USA hosted it, I've forgotten the specific state, hosted it was because after the 2001 bombing of the World Trade Center, they needed to push towards terrorists across the world that their country is safe, and to people across the world generally that their country is safe and still open for business in that regard. That's why they hosted it. So sometimes for political grandstanding, and that is beneficial. So even if countries don't achieve a return of investment in your eyes, they have certain subjective benefits that for themselves they want to still bid in that regard. But in any case, these countries haven't complained in that regard. But later on, I'll show you why it shows how these countries actually achieve financial benefits from it. The next case then they say that they may likely tax citizens. See, the games are, the idea of hosting Olympic Games comes from the Roman idea of bread and games to appease citizens. When you tax citizens, you can't do the sports washing and cold. You want to make them happy. That's why you host the games, so that to divert their attention from the economic problems and what have you. If you tax them, you bring their attention back to the economic problems. That's the whole idea of hosting games, gladiator fights and cold throughout history. But also the games pay for itself, so you are not likely to, what's the name, tax citizens for it. The kind of investment that comes in, hotel businesses and co that you can tax in that regard. So rather you make citizens able to participate in the economy because of the kind of economic expansion that happens in that period, in that regard, and they get a lot of liquidity in their pockets then. The next thing then they say is about tourism. See, and they say that tourism has no delta in our, because the country that are kind of hosting it are already big and people want to go there already. If that is true, then they don't have an extension or a case, because then their case has no, it affects their case also. Why is this true? All their arguments about how it will benefit the city that the International Olympic Committee will get, and the things about investment over there, also depend on people going to these countries in that regard. But even beyond that, there is a tokenistic benefit that these countries, so even if Brazil is a hotspot for tourism, during the Olympic Games, millions of people want to go there. So it expands it in that regard, and it makes it, their tourism industry more boosted. They have to build, what's the name, refurbish their tourism places and all those stuff. So that's actually good for them. The last thing then they say is that it will create inferiority complex. Yeah, your country is bad. Make it better. I don't know who the hell, because their country don't get rules against who's inferior. That has no analysis to it. UPI. Yeah, that is an exception. The facilities never belong to IOC. You are just making so it doesn't affect our case. Maybe your model you make the facility go to IOC. You have to show wise countries who be willing to hold the games when after all the profits will go to the IOC in that regard. You don't prove for the countries who have an incentive to bid for that. That's funny and exploitative system. Let's look at Tvucc extension. The first is the kind of economic gains you get. And there are three parts of it. First, the preparation process, which usually takes 5 to 10 years. The coordination spending, the construction spending. Secondly, the games economy in itself, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry and co. And how you boost these industries and co. reinvigorate your economy so that they inject a lot of liquidity into the hands of people. This is an artificial way of creating spending in that regard. The best response that can come from them is that this will create inflation. However, we don't think this spending will create inflation, and the reason is simple. Because there is an objective spending visible to investors and businessmen, and they will bring the appropriate, with demand, they will bring the appropriate supply, meaning that it will reach an equilibrium and there will be no inflation. That's the biggest thing that could have come from the end in that regard. But another big thing that usually hampers the conversation around the Olympic Games, that countries usually, they say go into debt right after, or these places become white elephants. Who has shown you how countries, after the 2002 Olympics in USA and co, after realized these trends and how making headway. So, for example, in France, the belts were made of recyclable materials and co. The medals were made of electronic waste in that regard. In In London, they have found ways of using these stadiums for other means, renting it out to football teams and co. Countries have realized the harms and are now making adjustments in that regard, and they are making their profits and they are not going to debt that soon. Thank you.
So starting in 3, 2, 1. 3 cases that you are getting with closing government. Firstly, on sustainability. Secondly, on the effects of a boom and bust economy. And lastly, on why we proliferate sports on our side and why that's better. But before that, the countries that these guys' impact affect and the ones that need this impact, for example, the political outcomes and the economic outcomes, if they are true, are countries that don't get it anyway. Why? Most of the countries that host these sports are ones that, one, have political influence, but two, are already rich, and these guys will give it to them anyway. That's the reason why USA has already hosted the Olympics like 5 times. That's the reason why Japan has hosted it 3 times, and China has hosted it more than 4 times. But up to today, Doha still cannot host it. Kyoto can still not host it because they are not giving it to them, and because they don't have the same level of political influence as these guys. That's the reason why, firstly, the impact alone, these guys cannot even get these bids approved from them to get those things in that regard. But there's a funny trend. In 2016, 7 cities bidded to host the Olympics that was eventually hosted in Rio. In 2020, 5 cities bidded for this thing that was then hosted in China. And in 2024, only 2 people wanted to get this thing, to the extent that one had to be transferred to LA in 2028. What is the reasons why? 3 things. Firstly, is the environmental impact of creating new ones. Realize it's not a country that hosts this thing. Mostly, it's a city in the country that hosts it. That's why they name it Paris Olympics, London Olympics, with one name. And it's not the LA that's going to host these guys. They need to build very new things all the time because these things travel even if it's in the same country. The problem is restarting those things and the environmental impact is asking these guys and the push for climate change from people, etc. But 2, the level of economic benefits that counts are ones that are very intangible to people, which I will actually talk about in my boom-bust economy analysis. But thirdly, the short-term economic gains equally in the boom-bust economy that people see. But also, people don't appreciate the non-conformist behavior that people has. Because who says that when these guys enter these countries, they love them more, they become associated. But that is like actually probabilistic. People go to UAE and see how women are being treated when exposés come out about how these people still are very strict on the anti-LGBTQ things. People still hate them anyway. Because when people went for the World Cup there, they weren't able to engage in loving who they wanted to love, etc. It's neither here or there. People still hate when these stories come to their countries and they want to be nationalistic. But also tell you, there's a white elephant syndrome. The problem is that 100 millions of people are pouring into your city. You need to expand your hotels to cater for those guys. At best, they give one stadium to West Ham, but out of the 4 other stadiums that's still there, the Maracanã in Brazil, it's now a useless sports stadium. They built it so big that the small clubs cannot use that stadium. The cost of maintaining those stadiums are so high, so they'll probably want to move to another one that they want to maintain and leave the bigger ones, because it is unreasonable to run a 200,000 seater when you're a small local club in that country, and it cannot be done. But then the gentrification that happens when the people living in those places, because of the inflation around that time, cannot access the essential goods and services, etc. that they have. But also additionally on the third part is to talk about propaganda from the opposition parties, etc. about how Olympics takes everything. There are foreigners trooping in, they'll take your culture away. All these things are reasons why people are wanting to let go of these things and the economy, etc. and they have to push these things to other people. Why is the first thing about how when we have sustainability is the best thing that can happen? Realize that in the 1980s, the USA pulled out of the Olympics that was happening because they generally felt that Athens wasn't safe to keep their people. They lacked the predictability that came there because it was always being changed and always being pushed around. In 2024, when they went to Paris, people were complaining that the heating system was not, the cold system was not good. So athletes literally had to sleep on the floor. In 2024, apart from the athletes, you know, Azamati, etc., they bounced a lot of the Ghanaian cycling guys because the visa allowing are not things that they want to give to these people, etc. Because these things rotate, and it's hard for these guys to get everything at that point because at every new time, you need to apply for cities, and they've become very complex. Do you know why? Now you don't only need to apply for a visa to enter places like Canada, where you're going to certain provinces like Quebec, etc. They also need to accept you before you come in, which is to say, when these things are predictable, it is one place. One, it means that the expertise for these people to host this thing more, it's much more better. Why? You've hosted it 3 or 4 times, and you are hosting it all those times. The people that engage in the videography, etc., the security details that are there are ones that can be trusted, have a record of working, and people know that when the people go there, they are safe. But beyond that, getting visas is just one country. It's not that today you get it here, tomorrow you get it here, and the Ghana Olympics Committee gets tired. We no longer get a place where when people train and they are ready to go for these things, because of the way that it travels around places, and you need those sorts of political ties, etc., to get these things from these people, it becomes hard. We think that the predictability is very important to make sure countries allay their fears, to increase their expertise in the sort of like quality that it gives, and to make sure that there's a quality assurance for these guys to get. The second thing is to talk about the economy and the boom and bust nature of this economy. What we want to say is that these people that host these things, there's a difference level between the threshold of people that come in and the threshold of people who maintain these things across the time. What is this to say? Olympics is happening. There are 100 millions of people coming to the city or into the country. What does that mean? One, you're investing heavily to make sure you accommodate all these people, to make sure they can come to your tourist sites. You expand it to cater for those numbers, etc. before these things come. What is the problem after those things, after the Olympics are done, etc., after Olympics are done, etc., and these people are gone? One, the amount of these people that are coming for this tourism, etc., decreases to that extent. The money gotten from this place and the money used to maintain these places are infinitely wide apart, which is to say, even if they do it, a large chunk of it still becomes, because the numbers here are different. OG. I should. Okay, that's one. POI, not POIs. So, continuing, right? The problem with even using to whitewash images is this. People feel a temporary sort of relief. We go to the country. No country is damned. Michael, you can't tell me any country is down. When the people are there, they'll make everybody laugh. They will not oppress people. So everybody is signing their teeth and it's okay. The problem is we don't only need this to make people happy. We need to make sure there's a final and total clamping down on these people. Not that temporarily people feel okay and they go back to that. Because today, China is still attacking the Uyghur people and all those things, and it's not solved. Everyone just feels like, oh, when we went to China, the Uyghur people were smiling and we saw them. We don't think that temporal thing is enough. But the last thing to talk about, then, as talking about the boom and bust economy, it is not manageable over time. That's the problem why people invest so much. The cost analysis of investing so much and gaining little over time is the reason why we don't want this. But no, at the end of the day, the proliferation of sports, if one person is able to consolidate everything, it's predictable and there's so much expertise. Every money we get as IOC can be used to invest in grassroots sports. So we don't need to give to another person to use in another thing any day. We cannot invest in things such as building facilities in local countries that are small enough for those guys and making sure people have access to training facilities, etc. And it's not a recurrent expenditure. There's no reason CJ doesn't win this debate.
I begin now. In the inception of the Olympic Games, there was a conversation about hosting the Olympics in Greece, because Greece is the ancestral part of these places. It's the ancestral maker of the Olympic Games in and of itself. The reason why this failed as a model is because, firstly, people simply were not able to engage with the Olympics in a way that was symbolically important to them. Because note that the only reason why sports has enough sway in the world that we exist in is primarily because it exists as entertainment. Why is this something that is important? Because all the economic benefits that exist, all the reasons why they can talk about this debate is simply because of the fact that people actually care enough to watch these things, and that translates into things like media rights and having been able to watch these things and people investing in media rights. But secondly, things like ticket sales and why that is something that is important. We are going to exclusively prove to you why hosting in a specific sport is likely to detract the buzz and the excitement about the Olympic Games, such that it actually affects why we are able to do the Olympic Games and how we are able to actively proliferate it in the long run, and the symbolic importance that it holds. We think that is something that is the most important thing in today's debate, and it precedes everything logically, because at the point where we do this, we are able to get everything we talk about. Before I continue, we tell OT that what is the guarantee that these two permanent hosts will be able to shoulder costs? The reason why this is something that is important is because we can never actively assume that these states are always going to be economically stable. In our instance, at least the people that are going to host are able to say that they have some level of economic standing, and that means that their bid is likely to be something that is good. For example, the way LA in the 1984 told the IOC that they actually have money to be able to host these things, and they have the facilities, and they'll be able to do those things. That means that all the conversations about how we never actually have a guarantee. But in our world, even if there's some level of harm on these places, they actually have a guarantee. That is why they bid in the first place. We don't think that's something that's important. But something that is true is that we don't think any state has any legitimacy to hold the IOC accountable or to hold the IOC at ransom, especially because of the fact that they are now the primary state, and there's never any likelihood that they are actually going to exist in any places. That is what we take into this debate. Note, why is excitement important? Firstly, every single part of the Olympics is based on sensationalism. Firstly, on the identity of the people and how they engage with sports. People watch the Olympics simply because of the fact that they are able to engage with the things that they see there. They are able to engage with different people existing in different contexts that actually like the things that they like. So people like Simone Biles because she's a black woman and she's still able to do those things. But not something else on sentimental value is simply the fact that people actually do these things because they hold it so dear to them, and that is where the conversation about media rights comes in. And that is where the conversation about ticket sales comes in. Because at the point where excitement is more important and we need to have more excitement, it means that at the point where people are not excited enough about the Olympic Games, they are not going to invest in it. They are not going to then the media don't have an incentive to actually invest in those media rights, and people are simply not going to buy those ticket sales. Because note, at the point where it's in one specific state and you are always going there all the time, what is the likelihood that there's any novelty that allows them to have that level of change? We don't think that is important. But something else that is important, I'll take it. Excitement drives states to even fund these players for the Olympic Games in and of itself. Because at the point where you create a mechanism that people like to see and people like to buy into what they're talking about, they are likely to fund it because now people know that the buzz exists and people are going to do these things. Note that this is not likely to happen in a world where it has in one state. Why is this true? Firstly, simply because of the fact that there's a limit to how much you can exploit the excitement that one specific state can have. And that's why Athens, Greece then lost, because you have as much, you have a limited amount of cultural sites, you have a limited amount of culture, and note, complacency, because now why do you have the reason to actively provide your state a way to be able to bolster those things? Note, even if you don't have anything in our world, the wealth of cultural experiences that exist around the world allows for different novelty, such that people are always excited to be able to get to those places and to be able to visit those places in the long run. We think then on that regard, simply alone, we are better off in our world, right? Note, why is this then important for the existence in and of itself? And something that I need to note. People have a really fucking short attention span into these debates. Why? Because sports hold the benefits only in the period that they exist on TV. That means that there are more competing medias due to the centralization of media. Like there's always Netflix, there's always other competing sports narrative, there's always another sports. The reason why the Olympics stayed more relevant was because of the novelty that is provided and that it existed in so many different contexts that it allows the specific nuance in these different spaces. Why is a point then so important? What are the impacts on our side, right?
If this analysis was true, people will know what EPL and La Liga for over 20 years they've played in the same.
You see, the problem with that is that the La Liga doesn't actively depend on the fact that there's a plethora of sports and there's a plethora of experiences and there's a plethora of different active people that exist. Like we always know that there are going to be players on the field. That is exactly what we know. But in the instance of the Olympic Games, it's about the different cultures that exist and the different cultures that people are able to imbibe to. That is why it is so specifically important. Why is this then more important on the long run? Because at the point where we have it in different states, even if we have some level of economic loss as we talk about, it is something that is likely to be proliferated at the fact that people are able to provide for these things. Firstly, the creation of the conversation that the Olympic allows us to have is something that is specifically nuanced. Because at the point where we have different instances and different places that it happens, we're likely to bring more conversation about different things. At the point where you don't have the buzz that will preach to you, you never actually have people even attending the games in the first place. But even if they attend the games in the first place, it is not in an instance where they actually enjoy what they are saying, and people are not even watching it in the instance to be able to engage with these conversations in the long run. Secondly, on the fact that we are able to showcase minority sports that exist in these places, and that means that at the point where you are going to different states, you are likely to do this. Why is this so important for everybody in the world? Because note that standards for other competitions exist based on the fact that the Olympics exist as a model for them and how they are able to work with in the long run. We believe then at that point it is better for everybody to have, we need to have a model that actually allows people to engage with these things. If you've not gotten anything from my case at all, you need to know the comparative. Our world is simply has some level of flaw, right? We are able to have some level of economic downfall, like because of the fact that these things are. But note that the reason why that is something that is easily justifiable is because states actually prepare for the Olympics. States actually allow the cities actually prepare for the Olympics to be able to do this because it's usually like 7 years bid. You can actively plan and do those things. Like LA has actively planned for like how many years now to be able to do these things. But at the point where even that doesn't happen, the creation of legacy, the creation of being able to create a level of buzz around the novelty that exists is something that is so important you don't get from any side. Our side beats OO because all their conversation about economics is neither here nor there and depends on the nuances of anything. Everything that happens in today's debate is primarily on the fact that people actually care about the Olympics to watch it anyway. At the point where you create a stagnant metric, a stagnant method, a stagnant way of happening those things, you will never get the buzz that we talk about. Our world provides a significant mechanism of buzz because of how we play on people's identity, people's perception, people's sentimental value, and everything that they do in today's debate. Proudly sealed.
Thank you very much. We shall invite the government
Okay, here is 5 minutes. Starting my speech now. So, panel, there's a reason why closing up cannot win, because their biggest case is on how they detract from excitement and buzz and why that is going to affect the Olympics. That will not work, because if they want to rely on history shows that USA has hosted the Olympic 5 times. It didn't detract from the number of people that went there. Japan has hosted it 3 times. It didn't detract from the excitement that went there. But also, this one already shows to you that other sports exist, La Liga, English League, where they hold those things the same, like all the time, since its inception. It doesn't detract from the excitement. But if you don't buy the engagement, let me tell you why people will still be excited. 1, because of things like prestige. Countries want to go and show that, oh, they can be able to win medals. 2, things such as bragging rights. 3, things such as proving egos. But 4, new players emerge. New players will still want to be able to improve themselves. They want to reach their highest form of actualization. 5, the fact that there are still new sports that will be created. There will still be the creation of minority sports. All the things they want to talk about still exist. So now tell me why there is not going to be excitement. They don't show that all these things exist to show that even if they say on one instance that doesn't exist, I'll give you 5 structural reasons why excitement exists. We beat them. And the next thing they say is that, oh, we think that what do you call it? This is likely going to be better because now they're kind of planning, they're going to plan it. So when they plan it, they'll be able to measure for all these things. But here's the thing, each and every 4 years, 7 years, countries plan for Olympics. They have to, and that's most extension is important, the boom bust, they have to fuel in so much money all the time, even if they plan it. We saw you the harsh economic consequences that happens. In our world, you have the structures, you have the facilities. You don't go and spend all those monies now coming to do the same thing. Why that is better is that it's very calculated, and that's why his predictability argumentation is very important. Why? Because in this instance, not only do you have the infrastructure, not only don't you have the personnel, but the fact that you know that it's every 4 years, every 7 years, you can structure your economy in such a way that you're able to insulate yourself from the boom bust that exists. In your world, it's just once. You can't be able to measure how the influx of all those economic repercussions are going to exist. But when we select those capacities, they're able to tune the economies to ensure that they are able to cater for all those harms. We think our world is bulletproof. We think we're able to engage that in that particular regard. We don't think that is very problematic, right? But opening and why we think still opening doesn't solve the problem. Because what does opening say? One of their biggest cases is that, oh, we think the cultural diversity, the cultural interaction is one that is very important. You get snippets of that from closing. But why is that very problematic? Because Elo understood how falsy that case was, because she was like, yes, people still interact with each other, but that is not enough. It is the place, they need to interact with the place and the culture. That's why that is most important. See, when you go for Olympics, you're usually housed in probably an Olympic village, a place that usually houses a lot of the people, and that is where usually you stay and have those Olympic activities. Which means to a large extent, if they really say you want to know the culture and people, they are not going to museums, they're not going to archaeology sites to know all these things. They're usually in one place. So where the cultural interaction usually happens is within those villages. It's within where the players interact with themselves, the sportsmen. What that means is that if you really want to have that perfect cultural whatever to be able to ensure that you're able to broaden people's perspectives about different minorities, etc., then we think we still solve it in our world, because those people will still be there, you will still engage, you still play sports, we solve that in our world, right? But the next thing they say is that, oh, we think that it's one because there's going to be political grandstand, and it's one that is very important here. It might be a marginal benefit to them, but we think that we don't want sports to be used as such a tool to be able to do that political grandstanding. But that's what I've already shown you, how that grandstanding to a large extent is inconsequential, because people still have the same perceptions about you. So tell me, what then is the delta in your world? We don't get any delta in the world. We think that's very problematic. But the whole thing about how necessarily they think that, oh, this is okay because bidding is free, etc. Yes, we understand bidding is free, but when you take a policy, even though people engage in it free, that in fact scrap that. When governments engage in big government policies, they know that the citizens can choose. But when they see certain harms, certain implications that are bad to their citizens or the people who engage in it, they have the right to come in. So your response cannot be that this is free will or they freely bidded in it. If we see certain harms that are bad, we think we can come in place to be able to make that change. And that's why Desmond speech is very important, because admittedly, these guys identified one. They identified the structure. Desmond was very, very, very detailed in analyzing all the problems that exist, from environment to travel restriction to the ability for of these people to create white elephants, etc., to show you the problems that exist. If I'll be able to show you a lot of harms that exist, we don't see why we should not allow this policy to exist to be able to solve these problems right in that thing. But you see, as Desmond's last seconds, he said something. He talked about how there's going to be proliferation of sports, especially within the developing states and those things. I don't think he analyzed it well. Let me end on that. So admittedly, opening says that the money is going to go to the members of the IOC, granted to them. But they didn't tell us what those monies will be used for. Honestly, no. Look on the sheet. They didn't write that. But this one is able to mechanize the impacts and why that is more important to the proliferation of sports. Why? Because most developing states, yes, they go for the Olympics. Ghana, how many teams did we send? We don't have the enough resources to be able to train for all the particular kinds of sports that exist for us to even have a fighting chance to be able to win them. When these monies are now shared, because now we have a standard place, the monies are be able to be more democratized. It means that we can develop infrastructure, we can develop things to ensure that the training is better. These people have access to better chances of performing at the Olympics. We think that's a better mechanization. Even if you say they've said it, we think you didn't buy the kit until we're able to give you the impact and how that necessarily proliferate sports and why that is very important. So in any way, we think you can credit that to us. But if I continue, Papa. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I get it. So here's the thing. You said that's the reason why he used the word temporal, because it is minuscule, it's minute. So for a short period of time, you are in bliss, you are in heaven. But what are the consequences? The consequences are dire. And you know, there's a reason why what do you call it? The people of Paris were protesting against the state. They said they were going to shit in the river because they didn't want to, forgive my language, they didn't want to use that because they necessarily felt that the harsh implications that were going to come were ones that it was the citizens that were going to benefit. It was the normal jack that was going to suffer all those harms, which means that the boom they talk about, if really there was a boom, why then would citizens be actually complaining all the time if people are doing this? It means the kind of benefit they say is really it sounds beautiful, but in reality that does not exist. So what we do is that we want a world where when there's one state, they know the burden that's coming on them. They can actively plan long-term, futuristic. That is how when example when a company is engaged in big economic success, able to plan and understand how the implications of the economy is going to happen. That's similar because when you are specialized in that field, those things you are better able to ensure that you'll be able to manage the repercussions of the harms that come in. When I think it's better because boom bust economy is bad. Imagine you are wearing a tight dress, it wasn't fitting, you forced it to fit, and now you walk. When you get to your room, even imagine you try to sit down, it bursts and everything comes out. In the end, you had that 5 seconds of beautiful and looking nice, but in the end, what happened? You are now a waste, you spoiled the dress. That is how bad and dire it is. If or not for anything at all, both aside, proliferation of sports, we have certainty in sports to ensure that the sport is better. There's no reason why closing governments can't be proud.
The Olympics is quite exclusive and different from a lot of other sporting games that exist around the world. Because of the exclusive things that exist with the Olympics, like the ability to show culture through sports, that is the main reason why the Olympics exist in the first place, to be able to celebrate culture through sports. But then secondly, for the very fact that the Olympics in itself is able to shoulder minority sports etc. that other sporting leagues do not consider or do not even play. That is why the bus that my father tells you about is extremely important, because the only place that certain sports can can be able to shine is through the Olympics, because people will not pay to go and watch them. People will not pay to be able to go to those like sporting facilities, etc. The reason why then our case is the most important case in today's debate is why the buzz is important and why we need to create that excitement around the Olympics such that we can be able to continue to be able to proliferate all of these benefits. And that's why our case is more important than everyone else, because for us to be able to get all of that economic benefits, for us to be able to get all of those things that OO tells you, OG tells you, etc., we need people to care about the Olympics in the first place, for them to go and watch it, for us to have all of those things to be able to happen in today's debate. We think that if that's the case and we detract from that, we cannot, like, no team can win today's debate. And why? So CG tells us that, oh, the United States has hosted it for 7 times, so that means that our case does not work. Note, they didn't host it in succession, and they hosted it at very different points in history. What that means is that at every point in time when they hosted it, time had passed, different trends had been set, etc. What that necessarily means is that at any point in time, they always had something new to show at the very point in time where they hosted the Olympics. But then panel, note that we had gone to different countries, etc., and had been refreshed and had different refreshing cultural perspective before we returned back to another country. What that means is that that is something that we actually need in today's debate. But then they say that predictability, and why predictability is important. Note, the whole idea of sports is built on unpredictability, that we will not know who is going to win next, that we will not know who is going to win the next medal, etc. What that necessarily means is that the whole principle of sports in itself is based on the unpredictable nature of it that will keep the excitement going, and the spontaneity of it that will keep people excited about it. What that necessarily means is that we cannot have a world where it's extremely predictable, that people can see what is coming. That necessarily means that things like ticket sales, fans, etc. are not going to buy into these things. We cannot have such a world to exist in today's debate. But then panel, moving on to why we say all of these things, like, and why it's important, right? We think that we think that at any point in time, the whole idea of predictability then cannot exist, because my partner tells you this model has been tried before and it didn't work because of this same reason, that it was boring, that people could not continue going to Greece at any point in time to go and watch the Olympics because this is one that became boring, the states became complacent, etc., in hosting the Olympics, that became something that they couldn't engage with. That necessarily means that we cannot have a world where we continue to do the same thing again, because it's not going to work. But then panel, they say things about sustainability, the boom and bust, etc., and like it runs to their case, the whole of that bench, that you know what, you are going to create an economic burden on these people, etc. Note, which world is better? A world where that economic burden is shared among states, or the world where the economic burden is put on one state only and one city only to continue hosting the Olympics at every point in time? Because then you put that one economic burden on them to continue providing for security, health, etc. They said that the IOC is going to do this. Note, in status quo, the IOC already gives money to host the Olympics. What that means is that the profit that they gained the year before is being put into the Olympics that is hosted the year, like the next Olympics that is being hosted. What that means is that the fact that they still need states to add up their money means is that the IOC does not have the capacity in order to be able to host the Olympics on their side. What that means is that the model that they provide in itself is inefficient and cannot work in today's debate. They cannot win. That means that at any point in time, the states will still need to contribute money in hosting these things. Why then should we put all that burden on one state instead of sharing that burden among every other state, so that they can be able to like share the burden, so that like they will not be the only ones to take up this burden at every point in time? That means that the pushback that will come from taxpayers exists much better on their side, because those taxpayers will feel that at every point in time, every like 2 years, they are the ones who are feeling the brunt of these things, rather than every other state who comes to the Olympics, right? Then that's one that is not fair and one that should not exist. But then panel, apart from the fact that the risk is shared, etc., note, things like environmental impact, etc., are things that are being curtailed and all of that. That looks like Paris finding innovative ways to go around these things, such that they will create like cardboard beds, etc., that they can recycle. What that means is that innovation to solve problems exists in a world where the burden goes around, such that everybody will find innovative ways to solve those problems. That necessarily means that in this debate, we are able to solve those problems better on our side. But then they say things like the white elephant syndrome, and that runs in opening too, because that white elephant syndrome is not the fault of the IOC, it